England, December 24, 1822. That Christmas Eve afternoon, the Duchy of Ravenshollow lay beneath a veil of snow that softened everything. The outlines of the gardens, the distant murmur of village bells, even the weight of 7 years of absence. Golden light filtered through the tall windows of the great hall, brushing the family portraits with a tenderness winter rarely allowed, as if the past might still be reached. Duke Vincent Lennox stood alone before the fire when he heard footsteps in the outer corridor, too quick for the hour, too restrained to be trivial. Moments later, the door opened quietly, and the butler appeared at the threshold. "Your Grace," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "there is a woman in the inner courtyard. She insists on speaking with you. She has brought a child." Vincent lifted his head slowly. His heart, long accustomed to the quiet hope of 7 empty Christmases, faltered in a way he did not recognize as courage or fear, only possibility. "How does she insist?" he asked. The butler hesitated, a minimal gesture, almost imperceptible. "With respect, sir, but without retreat," Vincent nodded once. "I will receive them in the smaller room." Minutes later, the side door was opened. In the sheltered space of the inner courtyard stood a woman of discreet bearing, holding the hand of a young girl. The child was small, perhaps 10, dark curls escaping from beneath a woolen hood, and eyes the same silvery shade as the winter sky. The same eyes the Duchess had carried until her final breath. The girl studied the house with quiet attention. There was no wonder in her gaze, only recognition, as if she were looking at something that had always existed, even while far away. Her fingers tightened around the woman's hand, but she did not step back. When Vincent appeared at the entrance, tall, austere, bearing the full weight of his name, the child lifted her chin. She did not advance. She did not curtsy. She simply held his gaze, and with the careful seriousness of someone who had practiced those words many times along the way, she said, "They told me you are my father." The Duke did not move, not because he doubted, not because the words were impossible, but because in that instant 7 years of guilt, of searches ended too soon, of candles lit in silence within a private chapel, transformed into something far more dangerous than pain. True hope. He saw his late wife's eyes. He saw the curve of the smile with which he had once rocked his daughter to sleep. He saw the gesture, that unconscious touch of the hand to her own shoulder, known only to the child he had lost. And as distant bells announced the eve of a Saviour's birth, a lost child crossed her final threshold, not into a house, but out of forgetting. If you too cherish period stories, those that whisper like old letters and echo like longing hearts, leave your like and subscribe to the Countess's Tales. Your support allows these narratives to cross oceans and reach more souls around the world. And before you go, tell me in the comments which city and country you're watching from. It's always enchanting to discover how far our stories travel. No one asked the girl's name in that first moment, nor the name of the woman who stood beside her. There are times when words must wait, as if any sound might fracture something too fragile to touch. Duke Vincent Lennox remained still at the entrance to the inner courtyard, tall and austere, his 42 years marked more by exhaustion than by time. His eyes, trained for restraint and command, moved over the child before him with an almost painful attention. They sought no proof. They recognized echoes, fragments of a past he had learned to bury simply in order to keep breathing. The girl met his gaze without tears. She was 10, yet carried a premature calm, the kind born when childhood learns too early how to wait and how not to ask. The cold had colored her cheeks, and still she stood firm, as if that threshold were the only possible place in the world. The woman beside her stepped forward discreetly. She spoke softly, with respect, explaining what little she knew. Years earlier, a woman had left the child in her husband's care, gravely ill, and never returned. The girl had been about 3, feverish and confused, unable to explain where she came from. She carried only an uncertain name and a persistent memory, snow-covered gardens, appearing again and again in her dreams. She had not come to demand anything, only to answer a question the child asked every night before sleep. Is this the place where I belong? Inside the house, Ravenshollow seemed suspended in time. The servants watched from a distance, held back by the gravity of the moment. Vincent felt something give within him, not loudly, but like snow yielding beneath the first step of a journey far too long. For 7 years, he had searched for a daughter presumed dead, and yet his heart had never believed her lost. That Christmas Eve afternoon, she was the one who found him. And for the first time since he had learned how to live without answers, the Duke of Ravenshollow understood that some truths do not arrive to explain the past. They arrive to return the future. Chapter 1. The Girl at the Threshold. The scent was the first thing that did not fade when the Duke asked them to come inside. Alice stood still at the center of the smaller room, her fingers still intertwined with Helen's, trying to name what tightened in her chest. It was not fear, not relief, it was something older, something deeper. As if every polished floorboard, every shadow cast by the low afternoon light, every inch of that space whispered something she could not quite hear, yet somehow knew. Leather, candle wax, pine, the sweet smoke of burning wood. She knew those scents. She did not know from where, but she knew them. The room was not grand. It was contained. Private. A receiving room meant for conversations that did not belong in public halls. Dark wooden walls warmed by the discreet fire in the hearth. A small side table, 2 armchairs, low shelves lined with old books. Nothing there had been made to impress. Everything there had been made to last. The tall man remained motionless near the door, as though guarding the space itself. He watched her with an intensity that made Alice want to lower her eyes, yet something stronger kept her still. She needed to see him. She needed to understand why that severe face, those dark eyes, that rigid posture, felt so essential. Helen released her hand slowly, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. Alice felt the cold of that absence at once, but did not move. She remained standing, waiting for something she could not yet name. That was when she saw the portrait. It was not large. It did not dominate the room. It rested atop the mantel, slightly inclined, meant to be seen up close, not from afar. A woman of serene beauty, dressed in pale blue, with silver eyes that seemed to hold their own light. Her smile was gentle, intimate, as if meant only for those who stood in that room. Alice tilted her head. She studied that face, that gaze, and something inside her broke, not with pain, but with longing. Longing for something she could not remember ever having. She used to sing, Alice murmured, unaware she had spoken aloud. She sang a song about stars. The silence that followed was heavy. Alice turned and saw the tall man take a step forward. His lips parted as though he meant to speak, and had forgotten how. He looked from the portrait to her, and something flickered in his dark eyes, dangerous and carefully restrained. But he did not cry. He only breathed in slowly, deliberately, like someone trying not to drown. "How do you know that?" he asked. His voice was low, rough, too controlled to be natural. Alice did not know how to answer. She looked at her hands, small, cold fingers, trying to explain something that had never made sense, not even to herself. "I dream," she began, hesitant. "I dream of snow, of gardens, and a voice that sings. Always the same voice." She lifted her eyes to meet his. "And I always wake up feeling like I forgot to come home." The man froze. Not like someone who doubts, but like someone who has finally received the answer to a question asked far too late. He took another careful step toward her. Then he knelt. Alice caught her breath. She had never seen an adult kneel before her, much less a man of that height, that quiet authority. He remained there at her level, and for the first time Alice truly saw him, the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the silver at his temples, the pain carried with discipline for years. "Do you remember your name?" he asked. There was so much gentleness in the question that Alice felt an unexpected ache behind her eyes. She shook her head slowly. "Helen calls me Alice," she said, "but I don't know if it's really my name. It's just a name I said when I was very small." The man closed his eyes briefly, as if that answer were both the worst and the best thing he could have heard. When he opened them again, there was resolve in them. "It is," he said. His voice trembled for the first time. "Your name is Alice." Then, with a care that felt practiced in dreams over many years, he extended his hand. Not as command, as invitation. Alice looked at the large hand, at the small scars along the fingers, at the gold wedding band catching the firelight. She looked at Helen standing near the door, hands clasped, eyes shining. Helen nodded slowly, and Alice understood that the gesture cost her everything. So she reached out her own hand, his fingers closed around hers, firm, warm, certain. And Alice felt something she had never known was missing. Belonging. He did not speak again. He simply remained there, kneeling before her, holding her hand as one holds something too precious to release. And for the first time in many years, Alice did not feel lost. She felt found. Outside, the village bells began to ring, calling the faithful to Christmas Eve Mass. But inside that smaller, secluded room, removed from the world, time seemed suspended, as though everything were waiting to see what would happen next. Alice looked once more at the portrait of the woman with silver eyes, and without thinking, softly hummed the first notes of the song that lived in her dreams. The man held his breath, and almost without realizing it, let the melody follow, low, restrained, closer to memory than to song. Chapter 2. What was lost? Vincent did not release the girl's hand right away. He remained kneeling at the center of the great hall that had witnessed 7 empty Christmases, feeling her small, cold fingers held within his own, trying to remember how to breathe without his chest aching. Her voice still echoed in him, fragile, childish, yet carrying notes he had not heard since the day his world had broken. The song. That cursed song that only the Duchess had ever sung. With effort, he loosened his grip and slowly rose to his feet. He needed to recover the composure his title demanded, but his legs trembled. His hands did too. And when he looked toward the woman standing near the door, Helen, he realized now, he recognized the same fear he felt reflected in her face. The fear of believing. "How old is she?" he asked. His voice came out harsher than he intended. 10, Your Grace," Helen replied, lowering her eyes. "Or close to it. We cannot be certain." 10 years. The age Alice would be now. Vincent turned back to the girl. She was studying the hall with that same unusual quiet, as if trying to fit together pieces of a puzzle only she could see. Dark curls fell over her thin shoulders. Her silver eyes reflected the firelight. And then he saw the gesture. Her hand touching her own shoulder, the same gesture his wife used when she was anxious. Identical. Vincent closed his eyes and let memory pull him backward. Winter, 1815. The journey had been planned with care. A long passage north with discreet stops along the way. Nothing rushed, nothing improvised. The Duchess was pregnant, and winter made her more fragile than she admitted. She had chosen to leave London that season, saying the country air would do her good. Vincent had not argued. He had insisted on taking their eldest daughter with her. He wanted the child to see snow across open fields, to hold light memories before the arrival of her brother. Their first stop would be the Duchess's aunt's house. After that, several nights at inns, as such a journey required in that season. He should have gone with them. That had been the plan. But that morning something urgent arose. Documents, signatures, a matter of inheritance that, according to the solicitors, could not wait. Noble affairs, foolish ones. "We should all go together," the Duchess had said, touching his face with the tenderness that always disarmed him. "Papers can wait." But he did not go. He sent his pregnant wife and his 3-year-old daughter ahead in separate carriages with the small retinue Winter required. There were 2 carriages. The Duchess travelled in one, Alice in the other, with her governess and the head coachman, accompanied by 2 footmen and a mounted scout. The news arrived days later: a fire at an inn. Chaos, smoke, several bodies, the governess dead, the coachman dead, the child missing, presumed dead. The Duchess survived only because she had not been there. Her departure had been delayed that morning. She remained at her aunt's house to rest, and the child travelled on with the governess and escort as planned. Vincent rode out at once. He rode through snow, darkness, and the fear tearing through his chest. He found only ashes, and among the ashes, only a child's shoe, too small to belong to anyone anymore. He refused to believe it. He hired men, searched villages, towns, ports, offered rewards, issued threats, began to beg. They found nothing but silence. And weeks later, a body, too small, too burned, impossible to identify with certainty, yet the right size. They pressed him, the solicitors, the relatives, even the family physician. "Your Grace must accept it." "The child is dead." But the Duchess never accepted it, not when they returned to Ravenshollow earlier than planned, not when shock, restrained grief, and refusal to accept the loss hastened a birth that should never have come so soon. Not when she gave birth to Jonathan and began to bleed, so much that the linens turned scarlet. She died asking him to keep searching. "She is alive, Vincent," she whispered, her silver eyes already losing their light. "Promise me." And he promised. The world moved on. They declared the girl dead, held a funeral, carved her name into an empty grave. And Vincent was left alone with a newborn son and a guilt that never healed. For 7 years, he lit a candle in the chapel every morning. He never dismantled his daughter's room, he never stopped searching, he never moved on. Now, Vincent opened his eyes. The girl was still there, real, alive, with his dead wife's eyes and the gesture only his daughter had ever made. He turned to Helen. "How did you find her?" Helen hesitated. "My husband, Dr. Fairchild, was not the first to see her, Your Grace." Vincent frowned. "Explain." "A woman found her after the fire. We don't know who she was. She said she discovered the child wandering alone in the confusion and kept her for some time. When the girl became gravely ill, she brought her to my husband and asked him to care for her. We never saw her again." Vincent remained silent. Someone had pulled the child from the fire, and that could only have been an act of courage and or of guilt. Where? On a secondary road to the north, near the route that leads toward Scotland. The same road. Guilt tightened in Vincent's throat. Why only now? Pain shaped the question. Pain turned into accusation. Helen lowered her eyes. "My husband died 2 years ago. Before that, we tried to discover where she came from. There were no papers, no clear memories. And I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of losing her," she said, her voice trembling. "She was all I had left, and my heart accepted her as my own daughter." Vincent looked at the simple woman, her hands rough with labor, and saw the truth. She had loved the child when he had failed. The anger dissolved. He turned back to the girl and knelt once more. "Do you remember anything besides the song?" The girl thought for a moment. "I remember snow at a garden tract and someone calling me." "Calling you what?" She frowned, concentrating, as if reaching for something very old. "It wasn't my name," she said slowly. "It was something affectionate." Vincent's heart faltered. "What?" he asked, barely able to speak. The girl closed her eyes. "Little Rose." The world stopped. It was not a name one invented, not something taught to a stranger child. Vincent finally allowed the tears to come. He knelt fully and touched the girl's face with a gentleness almost reverent. "Only your mother ever called you that," he murmured. "Her little Rose." The girl did not answer. She simply tilted her head slightly, as if the sound had finally found the right place within her. And in that moment Vincent Lennox knew. His daughter had never been lost. She had only been waiting to be called home. Chapter 3. The Girl Who Waited. Alice did not know why the name made her want to cry. Little Rose. It sounded strange, and yet right, like a forgotten word finally returning to the place it had never truly left. The man remained kneeling before her, his large hand resting against her cheek with a care Alice had never known. Not even with Helen, who had always been kind but contained, as if afraid of loving too much. He, however, looked at her as one looks upon something precious believed lost forever. Alice did not pull away. She stayed still, letting him touch her, trying to understand what stirred inside her. It was not fear, it was not discomfort. It was something older, as if her body remembered what her mind could not reach. "Little Rose," he repeated, his voice rough. "Do you remember anything else?" She closed her eyes. The memories always came like this, loose, fragmented. "There was snow," she said slowly. "Always snow, and gardens." When she opened her eyes, tears were running down his face. He did not try to hide them. "The winter garden," he murmured. "You used to hide among the rose bushes." The word echoed inside her. Rose bushes. "And there was someone else," Alice continued, frowning. "Someone who picked me up. He was tall. He smelled like—" She stopped. "Leather," he said, barely able to speak. "And cherry tobacco." Alice's eyes widened. "Yes." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering himself required physical effort. Alice glanced toward Helen, who stood near the door, hands clasped, eyes red. The smile the woman offered her was sad and final. Alice understood. She understood that she was about to leave the only mother she had ever known. She understood that this house, this man, this vast silence were about to claim her. And she understood, too, that she could not run, because something inside her did not want to. It wanted to stay. It wanted to belong. Before, her memories had been nothing but shadows, pain, fever, distant voices, and then Helen. Helen wiping her forehead with damp cloths, holding her hand when the world felt too large, always saying, with the same steady calm, "You're safe now. You're with me." Alice had believed her. In the first month she spoke very little. Words seemed to have vanished along with everything else. Helen never pressed her. She simply stayed close, caring for her with a quiet patience Alice would only later recognize as love. She vaguely remembered Dr. Fairchild, his gentle voice, steady hands, saying she only needed time. When he died, Helen cried, as if the ground had fallen away beneath her. The world did not end. It simply became smaller. And every night, before sleep, Alice asked the same question. "Do you think someone is looking for me?" "I don't know, dear," Helen would answer. "But for now you have me." Still, Alice knew. She knew she belonged to something that was still calling her, because when she closed her eyes, she saw wide gardens, high ceilings, and a woman with silver eyes singing about stars. 3 months earlier, something had changed. A man Dr. Fairchild had treated years before knocked on their door one cold afternoon. He was not from the village. He spoke little, like someone carrying stories that had never truly been his. He said he had been near the fire, not inside the inn, but helping people escape as the flames took hold. "I saw a woman running along the road," he said. "She was carrying a small girl. The child wore a locket." Hours later, far from there, he had found the object lying at the edge of the road. The chain broken. He had kept it out of unease, not for its worth. Later, hearing the doctor speak of a feverish child without a name, delivered by an unknown woman, Something troubled him. "I thought she was the girl's mother," he admitted, "but over time, I began to think the locket belonged to the child." Helen asked to see it. The moment she saw the darkened metal, the crest, the rose delicately engraved, she knew. Alice remembered the weight of the locket in her hand when she opened it for the first time. She did not know what it meant. She only knew it was hers. "I think I know where you came from," Helen had said, her voice barely there. And now they were here. Alice opened her eyes. The man was still kneeling before her, waiting, patient, as if he had all the time in the world, though his eyes said otherwise. "Are you my father?" she asked. He did not answer at once. He studied her as someone finally seeing clearly. "Yes," he said, "I am." Something loosened inside her. "And can I stay?" The question escaped raw, revealing the fear that had followed her every night, the fear of belonging nowhere. He extended his hand. "You never needed to ask permission to stay," he said with quiet certainty. "This has always been your home." Alice took his hand. For the first time in 7 years, she allowed herself to believe the waiting was over. Across the hall, Helen wiped her tears and smiled, because some mothers know that love means letting go, and some daughters know that leaving is not the same as forgetting. Chapter 4. The House That Watches. The news did not need to be announced. Ravenshollow was an ancient estate, built upon layers of time with walls that kept secrets and corridors that carried silence. The servants knew before Vincent said a word. They knew by the way he closed the doors of the great hall the night before, with unusual care, almost reverence. They knew by the silence that followed, not the ordinary silence of Christmas Eve, but the kind that comes before storms or miracles. That night, Alice did not sleep in the blue room that had once been hers. Vincent had not yet found the courage to open that door. Instead, they prepared a simple chamber near Helen's quarters, warm, clean, quiet. Alice accepted it with sincere gratitude, aware that each gesture of kindness was a gift one did not demand, only receive. But before sleeping, she rose from the bed and touched the locket beneath her nightgown, gazing at the frost-covered window. For the first time, she did not wonder whether she would need to leave at dawn. Christmas morning broke clear and cold. Vincent woke before sunrise, as he had every year since his wife's death. But this time, it was not grief that pulled him from sleep. It was something new, unfamiliar, something dangerously close to hope. He dressed in silence and made his way to the private chapel. The small room smelled of wax and old wood. The candles were unlit. For the first time in 7 years, he had not lit them the night before. Not because he had forgotten, but because he no longer needed to. Alice was home. Vincent knelt before the simple altar and looked toward the stained glass window of the blooming rose. Morning light filtered through the colored glass, scattering shades of red and gold across the stone floor. "She's come back," he murmured, "just as you said she would." He closed his eyes. "Forgive me," he whispered, "for doubting, for not searching hard enough." The words failed him. Perhaps there were never enough words. That was when he heard footsteps, light, hesitant. He turned. Alice stood at the doorway, barefoot, wearing only her nightgown and a shawl forgotten on a chair. Her dark curls were untamed from sleep. Her silver eyes observed everything with quiet caution. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I heard you leave." She stopped, uncertain. Vincent smiled and extended his hand, inviting her inside. She crossed the chapel slowly, taking in the space with restrained curiosity. She stopped before the stained glass. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "It was your mother's favorite." Alice fell silent. She looked at the altar, at the unlit candles. "You used to light them," she said. It was not a question. Vincent nodded. "Why did you stop?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because I don't need to anymore," he answered. "You're here." Alice thought for a few seconds. "May I?" Light one. For her. Vincent felt his throat tighten. He struck a match and lit the candle. Alice placed it at the center of the altar. The flame flickered, then steadied, and for the first time in 7 years, the chapel no longer felt like a place of mourning. It felt like a place of memory and gratitude. Mrs. Dawson was the first to understand. Vincent found her in the service corridor, her arms full of fresh linens. The gentle smile on her face, something he had not seen in years, was confirmation enough. "Prepare the blue room," he said, "and a room nearby for Mrs. Fairchild." She went pale. "The blue room, sir." "It was my daughter's," he replied, "and it will be again." The linens slipped from her arms. Mrs. Dawson covered her mouth. "She's come back," she whispered. Vincent only nodded. The housekeeper gathered the linens and hurried away, as if every second were too precious to waste. Mr. Henley saw the girl through a window and said nothing. He recognized the eyes. The news passed quietly from one servant to the next. In the kitchen, routine collapsed into murmurs and hurried orders. "Fresh milk," Mrs. Marlowe commanded. "Nothing left from yesterday is to be served today." It was Christmas, and it was a miracle. Vincent stopped before his wife's portrait. "Our little Rose has returned," he said. He touched the gilded frame. "You always knew." Perhaps it was imagination. Still, the painted smile seemed softer. He had not found her. She had found him. And perhaps that was enough. In the great hall, Alice touched the furniture carefully, as if needing to prove it was real. Helen remained close at her side. Jonathan watched from the top of the staircase. They all waited. Alice lifted her eyes to Vincent. "May I stay?" He crossed the hall, knelt before her and took her hands. "This house is yours," he said. "It always has been." He embraced her. Alice hesitated for a moment. Then she returned the embrace, and Vincent felt something break inside him. Not in pain, but in healing. Jonathan tightened his grip on the small tin soldier. That was his sister, and Ravenshollow, in silence, began to rearrange itself around the one who had always been meant to be there. Chapter 5. The Truth Without Proof. The room was too large. Alice remained at the threshold, taking in the space Mrs. Dawson had presented as her room, as if those words could truly belong to her, as if she had any right to something so vast, so quietly beautiful. The walls were a soft blue, almost the color of the winter sky on clear days. The bed was draped with white lace. A writing desk stood by the window, a shelf of old books beside it, a chest of toys tucked into the corner. Nothing looked used. Nothing looked forgotten. "It was yours," Mrs. Dawson said gently, straightening the curtains. The Duke never allowed anything to be changed. Alice stepped inside slowly. The thick carpet gave beneath her feet. She touched the bedspread with care, as if afraid of leaving a mark. Everything there was different from the small room she had shared with Helen. The peeling walls, the cold that slipped through the cracks, the narrow space that always reminded her not to take up too much. Here there was light, warmth, room to breathe, and still Alice felt too small to fill it. "Do you need anything, dear?" Mrs. Dawson asked. Alice shook her head. The housekeeper rested a gentle hand on her shoulder and left, closing the door with unusual care. Alone, Alice walked to the window. Snow covered the gardens like a flawless sheet. In the distance, she saw the rose bushes, bare, dark branches cutting through the white. Even so, unmistakable. She pressed her hand against the cold glass, trying to remember running among them, hiding, laughing. But the memory slipped away like water through her fingers. "You used to love those rose bushes." Alice turned. The Duke stood at the doorway. "Father," she corrected herself silently, still uncertain. He watched her in silence, as though every word required care. "Do I remember?" she asked. He stepped inside slowly. "You were 3, he said. "You used to escape the governess and hide among them. I pretended to search for a long time, though I always knew where you were." Alice looked back toward the gardens. "And that's why Little Rose?" "Yes. The word lingered between them. "Sometimes I think I remember," she admitted softly. "But I don't know if it's true, or if I made it up." The Duke knelt beside her, bringing himself to her height. "It doesn't matter," he said. "Memories don't always return whole. Some are simply recognized." Alice took a deep breath. "And what if I'm not who you expect me to be?" The fear escaped before she could stop it. He touched her face, this time with quiet certainty. "But I know who you are," he said, "not because I need proof, but because nothing about you feels unfamiliar to me. My heart knows." She hesitated. "Helen said there was a locket." Alice reached into her pocket and took out the small, darkened silver locket. She opened it carefully. Inside was only the delicate engraving of a rose bush etched into the metal. The Duke closed his fingers around it. "I gave this to your mother," he murmured. "On the day we were married." Silence. "That doesn't prove anything," Alice said carefully. He nodded. "No, but it confirms what we already knew." The tears came without warning. Alice did not try to stop them when he drew her into a firm, protective embrace. She cried for what she could not remember, for what she had lost, for Helen, for everything that had changed. When she finally calmed, he brought out something else. A letter. Old. The envelope still sealed, marked with red wax that had never been broken. "Your mother left this," he said, his voice unsteady. "She asked that it be read only if you returned." Alice looked at the letter, then at him. "You never opened it." "I couldn't," he confessed, lowering his eyes. "Not without you." He broke the seal slowly, unfolded the paper with careful hands. Then, in a voice that faltered with every line, he began to read. "My little Rose, if these words reach you, then you survived, and that was all I ever asked of the world. Trust the path, even when it feels lonely. Wait, because love always knows where to go. Forever your mother." His voice broke on the final line. Alice closed her eyes. She did not remember the woman who had written those words, but she remembered the feeling. When she opened them again, she spoke simply, as one recognizing something undeniable. "I came home," and for the first time the words did not feel like a wish. They felt like a fact. Chapter 6. The Name That Returns. Vincent spent hours in the library after leaving Alice in her room. He remained seated, his wife's letter resting between his fingers, rereading each line as if something might reveal itself this time. The delicate handwriting, the pauses marked by small blots of ink, the final signature, steady despite the weakness of her hand. Trust the path. She had trusted, and he had doubted. For 7 years he had allowed the world to convince him that persistence was madness, but his wife had never believed that. And now, Vincent folded the letter with care, slipped it into the inner pocket of his coat, and turned toward the window. Christmas morning continued on, clear and cold, laying that almost unreal purity across the gardens. Alice was in her room. Mrs. Dawson had checked not long before. The girl moved through the space with that same strange quiet, touching objects, as if she needed to convince herself they were real. 7 years spent learning how to be small. Vincent felt his chest tighten. There were decisions to be made, legal, social, inevitable, but before them there was something simpler, older, something that required neither solicitors nor witnesses, only a father who wished to show the world who his daughter was. The afternoon arrived gently. Vincent went down to the gardens wearing a heavy, dark wool coat. Snow crunched beneath his steps as he walked among the rose bushes. Most stood bare, dark branches cutting through the untouched white. But he knew that even in the harshest winter there was always one. He knelt before a low shrub, brushed away the snow with care, and there, hidden among black thorns, found what he had been seeking. A winter rose, small, nearly closed. White petals touched with pale pink, fragile and yet impossible to break. Vincent cut it carefully and rose holding the flower as if it were made of glass. Alice stood at the window when she saw her father in the gardens. She watched him move among the rose bushes, kneel, search with endless patience. Something stirred within her, curiosity mixed with belonging. Without thinking, she took the shawl Mrs. Dawson had left on the chair and slipped quietly down the stairs. She exited through the side door, the cold biting at her face. Her bare feet left small prints in the untouched snow. Vincent lifted his head when he heard her. Surprise crossed his eyes, then something softer, something like relief. "You'll catch cold," he said, not in reproach, only concern. "What were you doing?" Alice asked, wrapping her arms around herself. Vincent looked at the rose in his hand. "Looking for something that only appears in winter." Alice stepped closer, curious. "There are no roses in winter." He smiled faintly. "There are. They're rare. Your mother used to say they were the most beautiful." He held the flower out to her. Alice took it as though it were made of crystal, touching the petals with reverence. "Why did you look for a rose for me?" she asked. Vincent knelt before her, a gesture that was already becoming a ritual. "Because today," he said slowly, "I want everyone to know who you are." Alice's eyes widened. "How?" Vincent enclosed her cold hands within his own. "In this house, every child has a rose bush planted in their name. This one was planted when you were born. Every year your mother cut a flower and placed it in the Great Hall." Alice looked at the rose, then back at him. "But today isn't my birthday." "No," Vincent agreed, "but it is the day you returned, and that deserves to be honored." He extended his hand. "Come, there are people who need to meet you. The Great Hall was silent when Alice entered, her hand held in her father's. The servants were gathered, neatly aligned. Mrs. Dawson, Mr. Henley, Mrs. Marlowe, Mary, the gardeners, the coachman. All dressed in their finest, all watching her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to restrained emotion. Helen followed one step behind Alice. She had not joined the servants, nor had she moved forward. She remained there, discreet, steady, as one who accompanies without claiming yet without hiding. Alice felt her presence like an unseen hand at her back. At the center of the hall stood Jonathan. The boy clutched a small tin soldier, watching Alice as one looks upon something both unfamiliar and important. He had not spoken to her directly yet. Vincent squeezed her hand. "Jonathan," he called. "Come." The boy approached slowly, blue eyes wide. "Are you Alice?" he asked with the frankness of a 6-year-old. "I am." He glanced at the rose in her hand. "It's pretty." "Thank you." Silence followed, awkward, fragile. Then Jonathan extended the tin soldier he was holding. "It's my favorite," he said, blushing. "You can have it, if you want." Alice looked at the toy, small, carefully painted, clearly well-loved. She looked at Jonathan, at eyes waiting for either rejection or acceptance, and felt something gentle grow within her chest. "Thank you," she said, taking the soldier with reverence. "I'll take good care of him." Jonathan smiled, small, shy, but genuine, and Alice realized that perhaps, just perhaps, having a brother might not be so frightening after all. Vincent watched the two of them, feeling something he had not felt in years: hope. He turned to the assembled servants, and for the first time in 7 years allowed his voice to carry not only authority, but joy. "This is Lady Alice Lennox," he announced, "my daughter, a part of this house, and as of today, part of this family once more." There was no applause, no cheers, only respectful silence, and then, one by one, the servants bowed. Mrs. Dawson was the first to approach. She knelt before Alice, took her hand and kissed it lightly. "Welcome home, my lady." And Alice, holding the winter rose in one hand and the tin soldier in the other, finally understood. She did not need to ask permission to stay, because that home had never stopped waiting for her. Chapter 7. The Christmas Lunch. The table was too long. Alice paused at the doorway of the dining room, taking in the stretch of polished wood. The silverware aligned with precision, the high-backed chairs that resembled small thrones. White candles burned in silver candelabra. Modest arrangements of pine and red ribbon decorated the center. Everything smelled of wax, warm bread, and something sweet drifting in from the kitchen. It was beautiful, quietly beautiful, and frightening. Helen touched her shoulder gently. "It's all right," she whispered. Alice nodded, though her fingers tightened around the winter rose she still carried. Jonathan's tin soldier rested safely in the pocket of the new dress Mrs. Dawson had given her. Pale green, simple, but soft in a way she had never known before. Vincent entered the room from the library and stopped when he saw them standing there. "Please come in," he said, and there was something in his voice, a softness Alice was beginning to recognize as care. He pulled out a chair for Alice. Not at the far end of the table, distant and isolating, but at his right side, close. Then he pulled out another chair. "Mrs. Fairchild," he said, looking at Helen, "please, sit with us." Helen hesitated, hands tightening around her shawl. "Your Grace, I don't—" "It's Christmas," Vincent interrupted gently but firmly, "and you are part of this table, part of this story." Helen sat down slowly, as if still unsure she truly had permission. Alice reached for her hand beneath the table, the familiar, comforting gesture she had known since childhood. Jonathan came running in, blonde hair tousled, eyes bright. "Can I sit next to Alice?" he asked, not waiting for an answer, as he dragged a chair beside her. Vincent smiled, small but genuine. "You may." Mrs. Marlowe and Mary brought in the dishes, roasted lamb with herbs, golden potatoes, vegetables glistening with butter, fresh bread still steaming, a thick gravy in a porcelain tureen, and at the center, a dish of candied fruit that made Jonathan's eyes shine even more. Alice looked at the abundance of food and felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest. It was not hunger. It was memory, blurred and distant, yet present, of another table, another Christmas, another life she could not fully reach, but which had left its marks. "Are you all right?" Vincent asked softly, just for her. Alice nodded, though she could not speak. He served her carefully, small portions, nothing overwhelming. Then he served Helen, Jonathan, and himself. Jonathan talked without pause. He spoke of his toy soldiers, of the horses in the stables, of the dog Mrs. Marlowe let into the kitchen even when she was not supposed to. He laughed too loudly, gestured with his fork, spilled a bit of gravy onto the tablecloth and flushed red, waiting for reprimand. But Vincent only wiped the spill with his napkin and said, "It happens." Jonathan relaxed. Alice watched everything, the brother who spoke too much, the father who listened patiently, Helen smiling through damp eyes. And she realized this was not just a meal, it was a quiet reconstruction. One person at a time, the family was coming back into being. "Alice," Jonathan called, his mouth full of bread, "do you like horses?" She blinked, returning to the moment. I don't know. I've never ridden one." Jonathan's eyes widened, as if she had said the most astonishing thing imaginable. "Never. Never." He turned to his father. "Papa, can we teach Alice how to ride?" Vincent looked at his daughter, and there was something in his eyes, a silent question. "Would you like that?" he asked. Alice thought. Horses were large, intimidating. But Jonathan looked so eager, and there was something in the idea, of learning, of belonging, of creating new memories to replace the missing ones. "I think so," she said hesitantly. Jonathan celebrated as though he had received a gift. Vincent smiled. "Then we shall teach you." Dessert was Christmas pudding, dense and dark, covered in a golden sauce that smelled of spices and something strong Alice could not identify. Mrs. Marlowe brought it in herself, setting it at the center of the table with visible pride. "The former Duchess's recipe," she said, looking at Alice. "Your mother loved it." Alice looked at the pudding, then at the cook. She made this? Every Christmas, Mrs. Marlowe confirmed, eyes shining. And she always said one day she would teach you. The silence that followed was delicate. Vincent served Alice carefully. She tasted it slowly. The flavor was rich and sweet, with something that burned softly at the back of her throat. She did not know whether she liked it, but there was something in the taste, something distant and close at once. "Is it good?" Jonathan asked. Alice nodded. "It's different, but I think I like it." Helen squeezed her hand beneath the table, and Alice understood that it was all right. She did not need to remember everything. She did not need to feel what she thought she should feel. She only needed to be there. When the meal ended, Vincent did not rise at once. He remained seated, observing the three around the table, Jonathan tracing patterns on the napkin with a sauce-dampened finger, Alice holding the winter rose she had placed beside her plate, Helen with her hands folded, smiling with that mixture of joy and quiet sorrow. "Thank you," he said suddenly. They all looked at him. "For what?" Jonathan asked, confused. Vincent met each of their eyes. "For coming back," he said simply. "For staying. For making this house a home again." Alice felt her throat tighten. She said nothing. She only extended her small hand across the table. Vincent took it, firm, steady. And that Christmas, around that table that had once felt far too long and now felt exactly right, a family that had been broken began to mend, not perfect, not without scars, but together. Chapter 8. The Request. The afternoon passed gently. They played in the snow, Jonathan forming clumsy snowballs and throwing them at Alice, who laughed in a way Vincent had never heard before. Helen joined them for a time, watching with a smile that held joy, and something deeper. Vincent noticed that smile. He also noticed the way Helen kept her distance when she was not needed, how she avoided taking up too much space, how she spoke only in the present. "Alice is well today, Way. This afternoon was lovely, but never 'tomorrow we will' or 'next week we shall.'" And he realized with a tightening in his chest that Helen was preparing to leave. He saw it in Alice's eyes as well, that small hidden fear that appeared whenever Helen left a room, the way the girl followed her with her gaze, as if afraid that a single blink might make her disappear. He could not allow that. Later in the afternoon, while Alice and Jonathan played quietly in the library under Mrs. Dawson's watchful eye, Vincent sought Helen out. He found her in the sewing room, folding the few clothes she had brought with her. "Mrs. Fairchild," he said, "may I speak with you?" Helen rose at once, inclining her head. "Of course, Your Grace." Vincent closed the door behind him and drew a chair close, sitting down, not behind a desk, not in a position of authority, but before her, at the same level. "Helen," he began, and the use of her given name made her eyes widen. "May I call you that?" She nodded, unable to speak. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I ask for honesty." Helen clasped her hands in her lap, fingers tightly intertwined. "Always, Your Grace." "Are you planning to leave?" The silence answered for her. Helen lowered her eyes, her hands trembling faintly. "I thought it might be best. Miss Alice is settling in. She has you, she has young Lord Jonathan, she has this house. She no longer needs—" "Needs you?" Vincent finished gently. Helen looked up, tears shining. "She deserves more than I can offer, Your Grace. She deserves to be raised as a lady, to learn proper manners, music, French, to have a true—" She stopped, unable to finish. "A true mother?" Vincent asked, without judgment, only understanding. Helen nodded, wiping at her tears. "I am only a simple woman. I can barely read. I don't know the rules of this house, this world. It would be better for her if you vanished?" Vincent interrupted, his voice firm now. "Do you truly believe that?" Helen said nothing. Vincent leaned forward. "Helen, for all these years, you were everything to that child. You were mother, father, and family when I failed. You raised her when I was not there. But now she has you, And she still needs you, Vincent said firmly. More than you realize. Helen covered her face, sobbing. Vincent stood, walked to the window and looked out at the gardens where Alice and Jonathan had played earlier. Their small footprints still marked the snow. When I look at my daughter, he said quietly, I see the wife I lost. I see her eyes, the gestures she passed on, the memories we should have shared. But when I look at who Alice is now, he turned back. I see you, your kindness, your patience, your quiet strength. Alice is who she is because you raised her, and to take that from her, he paused, drawing a breath, would be as cruel as losing her all over again. Helen looked at him through her tears, disbelief in her eyes. Vincent stepped closer and knelt before her, the same gesture he had made so many times with Alice. Please, he said, and there was a humility in his voice few had ever heard from a duke. Stay, not as a servant, not as a guest, but as part of this family. As the mother she already knows. Helen's eyes widened. Your Grace, I don't know how to be a lady's companion. I don't know etiquette. I am not asking you to be a companion, Vincent interrupted. I am asking you to be a mother, nothing more. The mother who saved her. But my place, your place is beside her, Vincent said simply. As it always has been, as it always will be. Helen drew a shaky breath. You are certain? Absolutely, Vincent replied. Alice does not need to choose between us. She needs us both. I will be the father she lost, and you will remain the mother who never abandoned her. Helen could not speak. She only nodded, tears now flowing freely. Vincent touched her hand gently. This house has room for every kind of love, he said. And you have had a place here from the moment you brought my daughter back. Later that evening, when Alice went looking for Helen, she noticed something different. The small suitcase that had always sat in the corner, packed, ready, was no longer there. It lay open, being emptied. The few dresses Helen had brought were being placed into the drawers. Her hairbrush rested on the vanity. Her prayer book sat on the bedside table. Alice stopped at the threshold, her heart racing. Helen, the woman turned and smiled. Come in, dear. Alice stepped inside slowly, looking at the open case. You're not leaving? Helen knelt, taking Alice's hands in her own. No, my love, I'm not. But the suitcase. I was keeping it ready, just in case. Helen paused, breathing deeply. But your father asked me to stay. Permanently. Alice's eyes widened. He asked? He did, Helen said, smiling through tears. He said you need us both. And that this house has room for every kind of love. Alice threw herself into Helen's arms, crying with relief. Helen held her tightly, smoothing her hair. I never wanted to leave, she whispered. I only thought it would be better for you. It wouldn't have been, Alice said, her voice muffled against Helen's shoulder. Never. They remained like that for a long while, until Alice pulled back and wiped her tears. So, you'll stay? Forever? As long as you need me, Helen promised. I'll always need you, Alice said simply, and Helen smiled, no longer that temporary, sorrow-tinged smile, but something steadier, something permanent. That night at the simple Christmas supper, Vincent raised his glass. A toast, he said, looking at Alice, at Helen, at Jonathan. To family, to the one we lost, and to the one we found. They all raised their glasses, and as the distant village bells rang out to announce midnight, Ravenshollow finally breathed in peace, because some houses are not built of stone, but of love that waits, and of people who choose to stay. Chapter 9. Belonging. Transcreation, audiobook style. Spring did not ask permission to arrive at Ravenshollow. Alice was standing at the window when she noticed the first green bud breaking through the still rough branch of a rose bush. 3 months had passed since that Christmas Eve afternoon, and the world felt different. not only outside where the snow was yielding to living earth, but inside her as well. She no longer woke up feeling lost. She no longer searched for Helen in the dark, afraid she might have disappeared. Helen was there, in the room next door, in the steady footsteps along the corridor, in the constant presence that no longer needed to be announced. Belonging, Alice discovered, did not happen all at once. It happened in small gestures. Mornings began with Helen brushing her hair. Alice sat before the vanity, watching in the mirror as patient hands untangled her curls, speaking softly about the day, sometimes about nothing, sometimes about everything. "Do you feel at home?" Helen asked one morning. Alice looked at her through the reflection, surprised by the question. "I do," she answered simply. "Because you're here." Helen smiled. There was still wonder in that smile, but now there was permanence as well. Breakfasts were noisy. Jonathan talked too much, telling exaggerated stories about horses, dogs, and adventures that existed only in his imagination. Alice listened, asked questions, laughed. Their father watched the two of them with that quiet expression Alice had come to recognize as gratitude. Mrs. Dawson complained about the mess, though she smiled whenever she thought no one was watching. And Alice realized she was no longer observing everything from the outside. She was inside. She was part of it. She belonged, without effort. Afternoons were devoted to learning. Vincent insisted on a tutor, and Alice discovered that she enjoyed the stories, even as she stumbled through French and etiquette. Helen stayed nearby, knitting, listening. When the tutor left, she would ask Alice to read aloud. Alice understood, even without it being said. She was learning for Helen as well. Evenings belonged to Jonathan. The boy always appeared with some excuse, a nightmare, a broken toy, an unfinished story. Alice never refused him. "Do you think our mother would be happy?" he asked one night. Alice touched the silver rose brooch at her chest. "I think so." Jonathan nestled closer, satisfied with the answer. Spring brought visitors, curious ones, excessively polite ones, eyes that weighed more than words. Alice learned to smile, to answer carefully, but she hated being observed as a curiosity rather than as a daughter. Helen noticed. "What matters is not what they think," she said one afternoon. "It's what you know." "And what do I know?" Alice asked. "That you belong here." And Alice knew it was true. On a bright April morning, she came down to breakfast and found the house in its usual murmur. Jonathan stealing toast, Helen pouring tea, Mrs. Dawson complaining about a stained tablecloth. Vincent sat at the table reading the newspaper. He said nothing at first. He simply folded the paper carefully and slid it toward her. Alice recognized her own name before she understood why. Lady Alice Lennox. The notice was brief, formal, almost impersonal. It spoke of proper recognition, of documents delivered to the family solicitor, of official residence at Ravenshollow. It mentioned no miracles, no losses, no waiting. And yet, everything was there. Alice touched the paper as if to confirm it was real. She did not feel fear, only a strange calm, as though something had finally settled into place in the world. Vincent folded the paper again. "Now they know," he said simply. And something settled inside her. There was no longer any fear that this could be taken away. Some things once found are not lost again. That afternoon, Alice went alone to the chapel. She knelt before the stained glass rose and touched the brooch at her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, "for waiting, for believing." She held it there, feeling something anchor within her. Not fear, not doubt. Relief. That night, lying in bed, Alice looked at the dried winter rose on her desk, Jonathan's tin soldier on the bedside table, and listened to Helen humming softly in the room next door. And for the first time in her life, Alice did not need to search for where she was. She knew. She was home. Epilogue. Spring. April, 1824. The rose bushes were in bloom. Alice walked slowly among them, brushing her fingers across the petals, breathing in the fragrance that filled the gardens. White, blush, deep red, all in flower at once, as though they had been waiting for this moment. She was 11 now. Her hair had grown longer, braided by Helen that morning. The pale blue dress moved gently with the breeze. At her chest, the silver rose brooch rested where it always had. Jonathan ran ahead, chasing butterflies with the net he had received for his birthday. He laughed loudly, the dogs barking as they followed him. Alice smiled as she watched. Her brother had grown taller, more confident, yet he still carried the same open heart that had once offered her a small tin soldier on a distant Christmas morning. It seemed impossible that so little time had passed. It felt like a lifetime. From the terrace, Vincent watched his children. Children. The word still surprised him, not with doubt but with gratitude. Alice was different now, lighter, not only in body, but in the way she inhabited the world. She laughed easily, complained about her French lessons, made plans with the natural ease of someone who believed in tomorrow. At night, Vincent still passed by her room. He still watched her sleep, not from fear, from recognition. Helen appeared in the gardens carrying a basket of bread and fruit. "I thought you might be hungry," she said. Alice stole an apple, laughing. "I always am." Helen smoothed her hair, smiling. There were new strands of silver there, lines that had not existed before, but there was something rarer, too. Peace. "Thank you for staying," Alice said softly. Helen touched her cheek with tenderness. "Thank you for letting me." In the library, Alice sat beside her father. "Do you still light candles in the chapel?" she asked. "Sometimes," he answered, "not from pain, from gratitude." She thought for a moment. "Do you think Mama knows I'm all right?" Vincent drew her close. "I'm absolutely certain." Alice rested her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Papa." "I love you too, little Rose." That evening, the family gathered in the great hall. Jonathan showed crooked drawings. Alice read aloud. Helen knitted. Vincent watched them all, holding each detail close, knowing that happiness is not something one owns, only something one lives. Before bed, Alice went to the window. Moonlight washed over the gardens, and the rose bushes swayed softly in the night breeze. She touched the brooch at her chest. "Good night, Mama," she whispered. She lay down peacefully, certain of her place in the world. Later, Vincent passed by his daughter's room, watched her sleep, and then stopped before his wife's portrait. And that night, Ravens Hollow slept in silence, the candles unlit, the doors closed, the rose bushes in bloom. A house made of stone, memory, and a love that knew how to wait. Because some stories do not need grand endings, only promises kept. Thank you for staying until the very end of this story. If you're still here, it means you walked alongside these characters, through the waiting, the loss, and the quiet moments that led them home. If this story touched you, even just a little, please leave a like. It truly helps more than you might imagine. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to have you here, discovering more historical romances shaped by silence, emotion, and meaning. May this Christmas bring warmth, gentle memories, and new beginnings. And above all, that feeling we all search for, a sense of home. I wish you and those you love a very Merry Christmas, with peace in your heart and stories that stay with you.